Dear participants, a very warm good morning from Rome and welcome all of you to this webinar on integrating tenure security into land restoration initiative, a webinar dedicated to Africa and the Arab region. My name is Francesca Romano. I am a land tenure officer based in Rome, working for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. And I would like to welcome on behalf of FAO and the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, the two co-organizers of today's event. Before we start, a few housekeeping information. We are recording this event for the purpose of maintaining all the conversation that we have today for future use. I hope this is not a problem for any of the participants, otherwise please let us know. The event is will be delivered in 3 languages, in English, French, and Arabic. And you can access the interpretation to the event from the icon at the bottom of the screen, where in fact you see interpretation indicated. This is a webinar, so participants connected, and we have at the moment 180 participants. Welcome to all of you again. Will be able to interact with the speakers through the Q&A box, which is again at the bottom of your screen. Today's event is the first of a series of 3 events organized by FAO and the UNCCD, as I said, dedicated to Africa and the Arab region, followed by a second one dedicated to Latin America and the Caribbean, and then a third one for Central Europe, Asia, and the Pacific in the following day. But today is the first one. Let us remind all why we are here. And again, thank you for joining so numerous. In Africa and in the Arab region, but as well as in the rest of the world, secure access to land and natural resources is a fundamental leverage to achieving sustainable development and unlocking opportunities to avoid, reduce, and reverse land degradation. We all know, we are all aware how important and fundamental is secure tenure, as an incentive for sustainable land use and management. And how important and relevant is secure tenure to stimulate investment in land restoration and land degradation neutrality initiative. But we also know that unfortunately, every year, more than 24 billion tons of fertile soil disappear due to desertification. It is therefore fundamental to join forces to reverse such trend. And this is why we are all here today together. Today's session, which is gonna be for 3 hours, will give us an opportunity to understand how, at all levels, and in different countries and in different contexts, improving land governance using also internationally agreed standards, such as the Voluntary Guidelines on the Responsible Governance of Tenure, can have a positive consequence on avoiding land degradation and desertification. We will have the opportunity to hear from experiences from the field, from the Arab region and from Sub-Saharan Africa, on how linking tenure to land management can, in fact, provide an incentive for land restoration initiative. And we will end the session today by hearing from the organizers on the forthcoming initiatives at country level to support such efforts. We have today, colleagues, a very dense and intense agenda. The agenda today is divided in 3 main sessions. The first one will give the opportunity for the organizers to set the context, but also to hear from partners on the importance of data and communication. After a session on Q&A, we will then move into case studies from Africa and from the Arab region. And then we will conclude with a new initiative that is being launched by FAO and UNCCD to support country. So we will really deep dive into concrete actions. As today's session is very dense, and we will have a number of speakers, believe me, a fantastic panel of speakers, I remind all of us to be very diligent in timekeeping. I will be reminding everybody who is going beyond the slot that we need to conclude, because we want to give participants the opportunity to ask questions and to the panelists to reply on time. So let's first of all start with the welcome from the organizers of the event. We have two video messages recorded. The first one is from Andrea Meza Murillo, who is the Deputy Executive Secretary of the UNCCD, with over 20 years of expertise in sustainable development. This video message is then followed by a second one recorded by Maria Elena Semedo, FAO Deputy Director General. So I'm now asking my colleague to start with the video recorded from Andrea Meza Murillo. Thank you.
Dear friends and colleagues, I am pleased that you are joining us today for this regional webinar. We will take an in-depth look at the role that secure land tenure can play to enable more efficient and effective conservation, management, and restoration of our land resources, soil, water, and biodiversity. As you know, the UNCCD was the first multilateral agreement to explicitly recognize tenure security as a critical incentive and key enabling factor for advancing all dimensions of sustainable development. How land is managed impacts climate, biodiversity, and our health and livelihoods. Therefore, we cannot overlook its governance and the rights of the people who care for and work for the land. Since 2019, the UNCCD has been working closely together with Food and Agriculture Organization and other partners to respond to the mandates given by our parties through the land tenure decisions adopted at the COP. We have produced a technical guide on how to integrate the voluntary guidelines on the responsible governance of tenure into land degradation neutrality targets and the implementation of the convention. Central to the guide is the recognition of equal use and the legitimate ownership rights for women and other vulnerable groups, which we are also advocating for through the UNCCD's global campaign, Her Land, Her Rights, to raise awareness on the importance of this step for the well-being of women and girls, but also for the benefit of people and planet. Upon request from our country parties, the UNCCD, FAO, and other partners stand ready to assist with capacity building and technical support. Shortly, we will open a call for multi-stakeholder requests for consultations on land tenure. It is our aim and hope that the results of this consultation will be concrete and actionable, and that will allow to us to bring the conversation one step further as next session of the Committee for the Review of the Implementation of the Convention, CRIC, which will take place in Samarkand in October, and of course, at our COP16 next year in Saudi Arabia. I thank you for your attention and your commitment and wish you a very successful session.
Thank you. I think we can move to the next video from Maria Elena Semedo. As I said, she's Deputy Director General at FAO. She's an economist and politician from Cape Verde with 30 years of experience in the public service. Let's hear from Maria Elena Semedo then. Thank you.
Welcome to this regional webinar on the role of land tenure in addressing land degradation, jointly organized by the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations with partners. Land degradation affects 20 to 40% of global land area, undermining the well-being of 3.2 billion people. Governance of land tenure is a key enabler to achieve land degradation neutrality. Addressing tenure security helps ensure that all legitimate tenure rights holders, including women, youth, indigenous people, can fully participate in efforts to halt biodiversity loss, adopt climate-smart land management, and scale up ecosystem restoration to combat desertification and drought. Secure tenure rights are a key incentive to invest in land. Over a decade ago, government, civil society, the private sector, and academia adopted the landmark Voluntary Guidelines on Responsible Governance of Tenure of Land, Forest, and Fisheries in the context of national food security in the Committee on World Food Security. To better put these voluntary guidelines into action, as urged by members, FAO and UNCCD launched a joint initiative on integrating tenure security into land restoration initiatives, aimed at raising awareness on the value of tenure security and supporting countries to integrate the voluntary guidelines into land degradation neutrality. This collaborative effort will be presented here today. Friends, governance of tenure and land degradation neutrality are sensitive and complex issues. Looking at the past 10 years, efforts by many stakeholders to improve governance of tenure at local, national, and global levels are a true inspiration for countries wanting to address tenure in the context of land restoration. Today's webinar will spotlight such experience as well as useful resources available. FAO and UNCCD, along with other partners, stand ready to support countries to integrate the voluntary guidelines into their land degradation neutrality initiatives. Thank you.
Welcome back again. Let me also, first of all, thank Maria Elena Semedo and Andrea Mesa Murillo for their kind words, who reminded us about the challenges and the difficulties, but also the opportunities that we have ahead of us. I would also like to thank in advance the speakers that are with us today from Landesa, Land Portal, the International Land Coalition, and TMG, who have agreed to be the co-host of today's event. So thank you, colleagues, for joining us today. As I said, we have a fantastic panel of speakers. We would like to start today's session with a small exercise that we invite all of you to complete. We have, I believe, we're gonna pass in the chat a link that we would like all of you to use and to complete the exercise. This is called a word cloud poll, and I would like to ask my colleagues to launch the link if possible. Otherwise, let me know if we have any problem on that. so that we can see and we can start interacting with each other. We have 282 participants today, so interacting with all of you is going to be difficult, but we wanted to make a try in this regard, which I'm not seeing being very successful at the moment. Colleagues, please let me know if we are able to displace the link, or we have to move to the next exercise or session. Yes.
The link has been shared.
Thank you so much. So participants, you have in the chat a link that will bring you to a nice exercise that you are kindly asked to complete. And the exercise is very easy. What are the words that you think that comes to your mind when you hear the word land tenure? So we can see the results of the exercise popping up while we speak. And the more common is the word, the more bigger it becomes. We see security, ownership, human rights coming up, displacement. I can see many people contributing. Thank you so much. But the biggest one are still ownership, security, rights. Conflict is also appearing. Livelihood, of course, land is the source of livelihood for many, many people. I see also people contributing in the chat. Thank you so much. Securing rights for people, collaboration, that's also a very crucial and key words. But ownership, security of rights remains the most important at the moment. Thank you. Thank you so much. I also see people contributing in the chat. Possibly these are people that were not able to connect to the link, but this already gives us a great picture of what we feel being the crucial aspect to be discussed: ownership, security, rights, sustainability, governance. Thank you so much. I think we can stop sharing and we can move and we can start the discussion and deep dive into the session. The first speaker of today is Sasha Alexander. Sasha is a policy officer with the Secretariat of UNCCD. Sasha's presentation is crucial for today's session because Sasha will give us the background to the joint initiative and the mandate of this joint initiative. So Sasha, you have the floor and you have 10 minutes for your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Francesca, and welcome, dear participants. I'm going to present a very quick overview, presenting some of the background and the mandate for this initiative and for this work that we're undertaking with FAO and a number of other dedicated partners. As you know, the UNCCD is one of the 3 Rio Conventions, along with biodiversity and climate change. Our key objective is to assist countries and communities with the rehabilitation, conservation, and sustainable management of land and water resources to improve local livelihoods. And in response to the Sustainable Development Goal Target 15.3, which highlights the need to restore degraded land and soil, over 100 countries have already set their land degradation neutrality targets under the UNCCD. And a recent analysis indicates that over 1 billion hectares have already been committed to restoration under the Rio Conventions and other global and regional processes. Just under half of that 1 billion is committed under land degradation neutrality. And for the Africa region, is the largest land area that is committed to LDN. And there are a number of other processes, such as Africa 100, where the majority of African countries have committed to forest and landscape restoration programs and projects. In the Arab region, we have recent indications of an increased level of ambition, including the Middle East Greening Initiative and a number of other initiatives that are coming out of the Arab region to restore land. So that 1 billion number is still needs to be updated. Here's a timeline of what's happened and where we're going. As Maria Elena Semedo mentioned, tenure security is a key element, a key enabling factor in terms of scaling up land restoration initiatives. At COP14 in 2019, we had the landmark decision on land tenure. So the first multilateral and environmental agreement to embrace land tenure as part of the body of decisions that the Conference of the Parties take within the Rio Conventions. So this acknowledges the importance of tenure security, but also requests the Secretariat, along with its partners, to assist countries. And one of the specific requests was to produce a technical guide. And you will hear more about that as we go through the session today. We had a COP in Abidjan last year, last May, which really reinforced the previous decision and requested further guidance and the development of context-specific practical applications, exchange of lessons learned, so that countries could take the technical guide and apply it to their unique circumstances. So the FAO and UNCCD and other partners have come together in this joint initiative, and we will be explaining over the next 2 years our work plan and how we will deliver to the next COP. This is the decision that came out of COP14 in 2019, again with the specific request to produce a technical guide. We saw the technical guide as being an opportunity to focus on how to mainstream the VGGT, the principles and practices that are embedded in the VGGT, into a wide variety of restoration projects and programs. So we see the technical guide as kind of the bridge to bring together these two very important bodies of knowledge. The technical guide is rooted in the COP decisions. It's meant to be voluntary and flexible, action-oriented, and with the ability to deliver at multiple scales. The technical guide has been translated into all 6 UN languages, and there are dedicated web pages on both the UNCCD and FAO websites. We also developed an options paper with Landesa on awareness raising. And there were 4 main pillars where the paper discusses in detail some of the options that the various stakeholders can take to build awareness raising action plans, to help identify target audiences using a gender responsive approach, as well as selecting from high-level messaging options or the ability to customize or tailor messages for specific contexts. And then a plan for monitoring and evaluating the efficacy of awareness-raising activities. So we're here now with the COP15 decision. We're reacting to that, or responding to the specific requests of the countries. We're conducting regional webinars, and we will talk about the national consultations. One of the primary recognitions was that the value of multi-stakeholder partnerships and platforms and how they can contribute to the development of land restoration initiatives. We look at some opportunities for providing technical and administrative support. And here we also recognize that this can be a long-term process, and that we are now beginning to lay the foundations for that process. And then finally, we'll look at some of the financing opportunities and the ability to create a business model, make the economic case for why integrating land tenure into restoration can be a viable, cost-effective activity. We will continue to raise awareness, and we will also continue to explore global indicators and data on land tenure. So we see this as a particular time where we can re-energize the VGGT. As you know, the VGGT was launched 10 years ago, and we see a lot of developments over these last 10 years to leverage new donors, partnerships, and synergies that perhaps did not exist when the VGGT was launched. Also, working within specific land policies and frameworks, some of the national action plans that are responding to the Paris Agreement, to the Global Biodiversity Framework, and to LDN, so that we can facilitate greater effectiveness and establish these supporting processes. And then we also recognize that this involves a dedication of time and resources so that we can reach some of the more vulnerable groups and continue to work with women in land on access issues. The Global Biodiversity Framework, agreed in December of last year, has a number of targets. I highlight 3 of them. So target 2 is on the area under effective restoration. Target 10 looks at production landscapes so that they are managed sustainably. And we know that smallholders and pastoralists are an important part of this target. And then target 23, which specifically recognizes women's equal rights and access to land and natural resources. So here's a brief snapshot of the timeline. We had regional workshops with the focal points in February. This month, we're conducting the regional workshops for all stakeholders. We will move to an open call from countries and for requesting support on land tenure and the nexus with restoration. go to a selection process, and then begin national consultations in late 2023. I'd just like to highlight the work of the Global Mechanism, which is a unit of the UNCCD, which looks at assisting countries with capacity building at the national level, specifically on the LDN and national drought plans, so that countries can develop projects and programs and access funding for those projects and programs. So here in this schematic, you see how we move from the target setting program, which was specific to land degradation neutrality, which began in 2015, and how we move all the way through to financing projects and programs at the national and subnational level. This involves a lot of both technical partners as well as civil society and a number of multilateral and bilateral donors. So the Global Mechanism is currently developing a land tenure toolbox, and it will focus on developing the business case for land tenure. What is the value proposition? Second, it will look at creating a tenure checklist, which provides specific guidance to project developers as well as to donors. And then third, a mapping of stakeholders and financing opportunities. So if you would like to contribute to the case studies that are being developed, good practice examples, I would encourage you to reach out to either myself or some of my colleagues in the Global Mechanism who are managing this work. And so with that, I would thank you for your attention, and I will pass it back to Francesca.
Thank you, Sasha. Thank you for the presentation, which I think is extremely important to set the context of today's webinar. I would like to take the opportunity to thank all the participants who are posting in the chat. There is an amazing participation from many different countries. Please use the chat also to ask questions to the panelists while we proceed into the webinar. Let me now move to the next speaker, who is Aurélie Bresse. Aurélie is a land and water officer at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO. And Aurélie presentation is directly linked to, is a follow-up, in fact, to the presentation from Sasha, as Aurélie will deep dive into the technical guide that was also mentioned by Maria Elena Semedo this morning, that was specifically designed to guide the integration of the principle of the voluntary guidelines into the implementation of the UNCCD. Aurélie, you have the floor. Thank you.
Do you see my screen well?
We do see your screen, but not in presentation mode, Aurélie.
Sorry, it is a bit rebellious. Sorry for that. We practiced before.
No problem. It happens all the time. There is no problem.
Is it better now?
Try that one already. Yes, slideshow.
I am on slideshow, but it doesn't want to be on slideshow. Ah, it is.
I think it's coming. Thank you, Aurélie. Thank you. You have just lost 2 minutes of your time. Please go ahead.
Good morning, colleagues. So in order not to lose any more time, just a brief reminder. So the aim of the technical guide was to integrate the VGGT into UNCCD implementation and LDN achievement. Why the VGGT? Because they are the first soft law instrument and the main consensus on internationally accepted practices over responsible governance of tenure. They have come from a process of negotiation, multi-stakeholder negotiation and an agreement. And they set somehow a common language when it comes to governance of tenure. And it's important to get together around the table. So in that, as Sasha mentioned it, the technical guide is rooted on VGGT guidelines, principles, and also on UNCCD COP decision. And also what was seeking through this technical guide was to have flexible approach in order to address the multiple ways in which land degradation and tenure interrelates. So the technical guide scope was to be practical, somehow to answer on the how question, how to integrate those VGGT into UNCCD implementation and into LDN initiative. It was also to give somehow an entry point on many other technical guides that exist for very specific point to be addressed. So it was not to repeat, but you can see it as a gate that open and that's your entry point, and then many paths can be in front. And also tackling at trying to present actions that can be undertaken both at national and local level, taking into account what usually are LDN initiatives. The audience are policy and decision maker as first, but also land administrator, land managers, potential beneficiary as secondary audience. Three key considerations come throughout this entire technical guide. One is that it's based on legitimate tenure right. This is a key concept within the VGGT, meaning that it's not only the rights that are as of today in the legal framework, but also those that are used that on the ground by communities, by individuals, all the tenure arrangements that exist that are socially accepted, but may not be yet recognized into a legal framework. Also, a second principle that is key to the VGGT and to UNCCD is the consultation and participation. And here it's looking at informed participation of all potentially affected legitimate tenure rights prior to decision. And also it looks at when specifically we look at indigenous people, also at the free and prior and informed consent. And it looks at having a gender responsive approach, meaning that the action to promote the VGGT within the implementation of UNCCD should recognize, acknowledge the gender norms that exist, the possible inequalities that exist in matter of tenure security, land access, and seek ways and means to address them within the project. And those three considerations go through all the technical action that are suggested in the technical guides. The technical guide, to allow for this flexibility that I was talking at the beginning, has been designed in 9 pathways. 4 are considered as universal and 5 as context dependent. So now if we enter into looking a bit what are those 4 universal pathways, the first one is looking at enhancing policy and legal framework, and in particular, looking at this notion of legitimate tenure right, its definition, its recognition by law, and by having the capacity to conduct participatory assessment of the legal and policy framework that support LDN implementation. The second one, look more at strengthening, building multi-stakeholders platform that gather relevant sectors and stakeholders in order to generate knowledge exchange but also to promote data interoperability, and there also having this capacity of dialogue and solution generation, both at national and at local level when implementing LDN initiative. The third one is looking more specifically at addressing the barriers to gender equal tenure right, to women tenure security, to women access to land. This encompass actions such as raising awareness, but also ensuring participation of women to decision-making body or to land administration services, to strengthen CSOs that can support, so to ensure equal access also to grievance and redress mechanism. And the fourth one is this one, is setting up accessible and transparent grievance and dispute resolution mechanism. This one is particularly important also when common LDN initiative, one of the elements that is target is improving how land is, and improving somehow the value of land by reducing land degradation, by reverting it. And therefore, it is a way either to have the capacity to see claims whenever there is a different that happen, but also to provide a person with fair, transparent, gender responsive dispute resolution mechanism. So those are the 4 universal pathways that we have considered from the literature, from all the elements we had when preparing this joint technical guide, that this could be in any LDN initiative taken into account. Now, the context-specific pathways. When come LDN initiative, land degradation neutrality, often integrating land use planning is an important part of it, in order to balance the land degradation. And here is to have a tenure responsive and participatory integrated land use planning in a way that allows for possibly affected land user to get access to the information to ensure that they can have meaningful participation to the decision-making over the land use planning, and also that they have rights that are recognized and safeguards against threats and infringement. The pathway 6 look at more specifically 2 types of tools, land administration tools, that are the land banks and the land consolidation, that are 2 tools that whenever the legal framework already exists in country, they may be used by LDN initiatives in order to reduce land fragmentation, support better structuration of land holdings in order to diminish the cost of adopting, for instance, sustainable land management practices, but also that can support, for instance, land use planning and afforestation programs. These are the type of tools that may be supported by the land bank. Also, they can support access to land, particularly of use. The pathway 7 is about recognizing and documenting legitimate tenure right on public lands. And so where it comes a lot about when legitimate tenure rights are recognized, as we were first saying, then the system to record those rights, to document them, need to be set up or strengthened in order also to be able to integrate those tenure rights. And there are several considerations and further literature, of course, contained into the technical guide. The pathway 8 look more specifically at managing the commons, recognizing and documenting tenure rights for sustainable management of the commons. So it look at the process in which we can be recognized commons, that boundaries can be delimited, but also looking at how can be generated positive governance, local governance of commons within the collective land that are recognized. The pathway 9 look more specifically at allocating and strengthening rights and duties on private land. So private holders vary a lot in size, but also in the type of tenure they may have, or in the type of land use that they may have. And here, in the technical guide, there are various options that are highlighted both at national and at local level to either integrate sustainable land management consideration within the legal framework, within the duties that are linked to private properties, but also look at, for instance, enhancing the security of some of the contract tenure arrangement that exist on private land. And those are in particular when there is strong leasing. There is a lot of leasing agreement, but situation of mistrust, short leasing agreement that may not allow to to adopt sustainable land management. A word on the approach that is.
Colleen, sorry to interrupt you. I would like to, Aurélie, sorry, to call for a closing of the presentation, if you don't mind, in the next 2 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, so I go a bit faster. So what is suggested here is to have first an assessment of the tenure situation, the biophysical factor, and from there being able, by looking at the land use system and the land tenure related difficulty, to be able to have certain pathways that are chosen. We are aware that several will be needed. So I will pass on this example because a nice video will be displayed. Sierra Leone, multi-stakeholder platform in Sierra Leone, saying that through a lengthy, several-year process, almost a decade in Sierra Leone, and a work of a multi-stakeholder platform, several key results have been achieved in terms of review of the policy and legal framework in Sierra Leone by matching them also with the VGGT. There is also an example for land conservation in Tunisia that has been promoted through land consolidation. I will pass on to that. You will receive the presentation saying that some key message: tenure security increase the positive impact of LDN initiative. It should be done since addressing tenure since the beginning of an LDN initiative. That meaningful and inclusive consultation are absolutely essential to promote that legitimate tenure rights are not overlooked in LDN initiative. That gender responsive approaches address the underlying inequality in control and access to land resources. That raising awareness and the sharing of lessons learned on responsible land governance enhance dialogue, partnerships, and mutual learning. And that also more data and indicators, more success story, more case studies are needed on the way that land governance linked to LDN initiative achievement, to land degradation neutrality achievement. Sorry for that. With that, I will stop. You will receive the presentation and happy to respond to any question. Thank you.
Thank you, Aurélie, and sorry for interrupting your presentation. But as I said, we have a dense agenda. I see also a number of questions popping up in the chat. So I'm inviting all the panelists to answer to questions that they deem appropriate. There is many requests on additional information, presentations to be shared, translation, etc. So have a look at the chat when possible. Let's take a break from presentations. Aurélie mentioned in her one of the slides that we have an interesting case study to share and to present. This is from Senegal. We have a short video that we would like to show you today, entitled "Towards Land Tenure Security and Inclusive Land Governance in Senegal." So can we move to the video? It's very short, it's 3 minutes, but we trust very interesting. Thank you. Should be coming soon. Colleagues, if we have any problem, please let me know. We move to the next speaker and we postpone the video. Okay, there must be some technical problem. Let me know. We can eventually look at the video after the next speaker, who is Evelyn. Evelyn, are you ready for the presentation? Yes, I can see.
Yes,
you.
I am.
Let me then briefly introduce Evelyn Nairesiae. Evelyn is the Africa Regional Director for Landesa. Landesa is one of the organizations who today has agreed to co-host the event together with FAO and UNCCD. Evelyn is a social scientist with over 20 years of experience in land and natural resource governance. I've known Evelyn for many years now, and I really appreciate her work on land in the protection of the most vulnerable people in the region. But today, Evelyn's presentation is specifically on awareness raising and how to increase public knowledge of responsible land governance is a key aspect to combat desertification, land degradation, and drought. So Evelyn will give us a different perspective on how the problem can and should be addressed through awareness raising. Evelyn, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me clearly.
We do hear you very well, Evelyn. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much to you as the facilitator, and hello to everyone from Nairobi. As already introduced, this paper will be able to focus on aspects of raising awareness, addressing question on knowledge about all the discussions that we are having today, but particularly centering around land tenure security and the nexus with the land degradation, drought and desertification. I know from Sasha's presentation, as well as what Aurelia also talked about, the case, I'll be able to share a number of case studies that brings into context the discussion and how awareness raising can be done around the work that Landesa is working on in Africa, but also looking at the experiences of local communities and how this can benefit from our experiences. So we know very well that land rights really matter for people and planet. And in the context of this particular conversation, we'll focus on the issue of awareness raising, being an area that really complements and makes it possible for communities, for governments, for anyone, any stakeholder working around, working towards LDN or land degradation neutrality will be able to achieve only and if they have full information, they are aware about why tenure security really matters in this aspect. As briefly mentioned also in Sasha's presentation, I'll be able to speak to the core aspects of the steps for effective awareness raising when it comes to creating awareness, raising knowledge and understanding around tenure security, why it matters, around land degradation, achieving land degradation neutrality, but also reducing the risks of degradation of our land and other ecosystems. So the first step that I'm going to talk about is about drafting an action plan. Why draft an action plan and how do we need to draft one? So the different stakeholders, be it the government, the local community, the private sector, if we are working towards creating awareness, we have first of all to understand the context for which the awareness will be targeted. Without understanding the context, at times we'll be able to package messages that do not necessarily respond to the issues of tenure security, do not speak to the hearts and the aspects on the ground, and that makes it very difficult to connect with the messages, or even raise knowledge that communities are able to identify with, or the vulnerable communities are able to identify with. We are also looking at the point of developing an action plan so that we are fully aware what approach or what awareness areas that we are going to focus on and at what level do we need to target at this point. So more the designing plan, more ensuring that we have an action plan that then speaks to what exactly are we going to do happens under stage 1. Secondly, we have to identify and partner with our target audiences. target audiences here and the area of specific interest here, we are looking at local communities. That is where really degradation really happens. That's where the impact of drought is felt. That's where, for example, when you're talking about desertification, it is the communities that often are actually at the front line of facing these challenges on a daily basis. How do we ensure that these, as they come to the table while designing, how to communicate, how to build knowledge as key stakeholders? How do we ensure that the aspects that affect them directly, we are paying attention to that? Here we are talking about ensuring that also we are able to address, not treating and maybe working with the communities just as a universal group, but recognizing that within the community, there are men and women, there are young people, there are also children. How do we ensure that we are able to apply the gender equality and social inclusion approaches to be able to dissect how and what issues are really important or affecting the different groups when it comes to issues of tenure security, and what is the link between those issues and aspects of LDN? Without understanding these aspects makes it also very challenging to ensure inclusivity in terms of representation, but also ensuring that we are able to speak to the real issues that really matters to the different target audiences or communities or the policymakers or the stakeholders or even the private sectors, because also the private sector are not left out when we're talking about these messages. The third point is about adopting key messaging. So the messaging here have to be tailored to the needs, to the context, to ensuring that we are able to address specific issues of land tenure security. And here, these messages have to really address the link between tenure security and land degradation. Why do we say they are important key messages? We understand that there are different mechanisms for which either government, civil society organization, or communities work around and govern their own land. But ensuring that we are able to pick top messages that then speaks to their realities, whether it's about land administration, and you are planning to be able to adjudicate the land, you are planning to be able to restore the forest, for example. How are we able to address the tenure perspective of what you are going to do as a government or as a private sector, for example, who is planning to work with the communities, for example, in acquiring their land to be able to, work, for example, with the smallholder farmers. Their tenure rights is important, but as a private sector, for example, going to work in these communities, if you are going to alienate their land and, for example, take up their forest and so forth, without necessarily looking at the tenure aspects and how that affects them, but also how does that link to the practices, the land use practices, the approaches that are going to be used, and whether even there is planning that has taken place that would be able to facilitate these communities' understanding and appreciation of what the private sector is going to do on their land, and whether the private sector will also, based on an understanding and based on the core messages here, appreciate why it is important, for example, to ensure that land use practices really embrace approaches and best practices that really secure the health of the soil, secure, for example, the forest, ensure, for example, there is tree planting or intercropping and other forms of soil and environmental conservation that are really key in terms of reducing degradation. And at the core messaging also, we have to appreciate that different communities, the messages have to be prepared and delivered in different ways, in a way that we can able to connect, for example, with smallholder farmers, with the pastoralists, indigenous communities and forest dwellers. How are we going to reach them? How do we ensure the messages really are packaged in a way that they speak to our audiences and in a manner that they are also gender responsive, they are also able to embrace equality, and we are able to link and tie that closely with the different elements of LDN when it comes to tenure security. The last step is about evaluating the success, learning, ensuring that we are able to adapt as we package the message, whether it's through conferencing, whether it's about radio, whether it's about interacting through dialogue with various communities, or even the multi-stakeholder platforms that have since been mentioned. They create the platforms where we are able to learn, where communities are able to interact, they are able to get information. And linking tenure security and LDN is a powerful message in terms of enabling communities to be aware that if they are able to secure their tenure rights, if they are able to adopt practices that really secure their soil, their environment, then they are able to contribute to LDN. They are able to contribute to sustainable development. They are able to reduce the risks, for example, on climate change. So by doing so, we are able to evaluate whether these messages have really reached home, in terms of, are they able to adopt these practices that we are talking about, or the messages that have since been passed? If it's about a private sector, have they been able to address their policies? Have they been able to respond to the needs of, securing tenure rights of the local communities? Or, for example, planting trees and ensuring that the community is able to adopt some of these practices. If not, what can we learn from it? How can we be able to adjust and make changes? But as we think about all these issues, we are fully aware that talking about gender responsiveness and the JC approach, the gender equality and social inclusion, is often not a very easy approach for communities that are highly patriarchal, where for vulnerability, for example, for women is likely to be very high, relegated as maybe recipients of decision-making around land tenure security, and that the men of those communities, for example, will be the one governing and making decisions. So how do we ensure that the vulnerable groups are integrated in ensuring that first we are able to identify who they are, and we are able to map them, and we are able not just to put them in groups like here, we have the indigenous communities that maybe their land tenure security is at risk, or here are women, for example, their land tenure security are at risk, or the smallholder farmers or any other group. But also we are able to consider the intersectionality, looking at the fact that being a woman, for example, in a community that is highly patriarchal, one, you'll not be, high chances of that woman securing their tenure rights, are already challenged by fact of being a woman. But secondly, you may find also a woman in the same community, which doesn't necessarily recognize these rights because of cultural norms and other, or religious norms, or irresponsible legal policy. But then this woman is also a widow, and maybe very vulnerable, makes the situation even more vulnerable. Or, for example, she's also single and not married. That also makes it even more complex. But also looking at situation, for example, of the pastoralist communities already struggling to, or indigenous communities struggling to secure their tenure rights. And what dynamics then makes it very challenging for us to be able to speak directly to these communities in terms of the value of tenure security, why this really matters, and how does this link to issues of reducing degradation. Then be able to speak to the specific challenges and needs of this group is also important. And that gives us an opportunity also to tailor the messages to be specific and responsive to those specific needs. If it's about securing tenure rights, if it's about women land rights, if it's about equality, for example, regardless of whether you are a man or a woman, or a boy or a girl, how do we ensure that we are able to tailor these messages to be able to speak to these communities? If it's about policy-related aspects, how do we ensure that we are able to speak and be able to connect, but also to elevate the importance of securing tenure rights as a means or as an enabling factor towards reducing degradation? But as we consider all this, there are power dynamics. For us as organizers, be it, for example, a civil society organization or UN agencies that are working with government, or government, for example, making efforts on land restoration or forest restorations, big programs that are there. But what are the power dynamics in terms of how we communicate to the communities about these issues? Are we seeing them just as recipient of the messages that we want to communicate? Do we see them as part of our own initiatives? And that they are stakeholders and they have a voice, they have opportunities to make decisions? How can we ensure that the connection or the link or the nexus between tenure security and land degradation promote a power balance, promote and even put the communities at the fore in terms of decision making, in terms of ensuring their rights, in terms of ensuring that they are fully aware why this is really important, and be able to connect this importance in terms of social, economic, environmental, and as well as national development. So case studies here we have in Tanzania, Landesa, and Liberia.
Dear Evelyn, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We need to come to a closure soon.
Yeah, 2 minutes I should be done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so in Tanzania and Liberia, Landesa is working with the communities, directly with the communities in collaboration with local partners to be able to support communities. These are mainly communities that are smallholder farmers, communities that are also dependent on the forest, to be able to carry out an inclusive integrated land use planning. And within that process, we are supporting the community not just to plan, but to be fully aware with core messages that we are able to deliver through what we call talking books, which is a gadget that is taken to the community in form of a radio, with the messages that are prepared in local languages to support communities to understand. And this happens in Liberia. In Tanzania, we support the communities to map their land, to be able to document, to be able to secure tenure rights. And for the smallholder farmers and the pastoralists are able to even to zone their land, that we are going to secure this place for pasture. We are going to secure this place for forest and work towards restoring degraded land. In addition to that, we have the Stand for Her Land campaign, as most of you are aware, is a global campaign. In Africa, we work in a number of countries, in Ethiopia, Senegal, Tanzania, and Uganda. And we have been able to carry the message along on why securing women land is not just important for economic purpose, but is also very important in contributing towards your soil health, securing your environment, and reducing degradation. And this is important for us and why we are investing in this process. But there are case studies that probably can speak directly to the issues that we have talked about and why it's really important to be able to draw the links and the nexus between tenure security and land degradation. For example, here we have a case study from Burkina Faso, but also Nigeria and Cameroon, where we've seen where communities that have secure tenure rights. In 2019, this study shows there was a significant increase in terms of planting trees and communities benefiting directly from their resources. So I thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you our stories and our experiences, and we hope we can collaborate more to make this a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn. And sorry I had to rush you through the case studies, which in fact are extremely interesting. And they speak to a number of questions that we have in the chat that you might want to address some of them, or we might come back to those in the Q&A session, talking about how to specifically communicate and how to address issues in relation to indigenous people or pastoralist communities or women, and how difficult and how specific needs to be the messages to these particular groups. So your presentation was in fact extremely enlightening, and I hope that the participants who had questions in this regard found some of the answer in your presentation. Thank you very much, Evelyn, again. And I want to move to the last set of presentation for this first session, part of our today webinar, which is in fact going to be dedicated to data, the role of data and information in supporting the global land degradation neutrality agenda. So I am particularly happy to give the floor to two excellent colleagues. The first is Laura Meggiolaro. Laura is the Managing Director of the Land Portal Foundation, who will share the presentation together with Eva Herschel, who is a Data and Land Monitoring Lead at the International Land Coalition. If I am not mistaken, we have two separate presentations, but short, one after the other. And the first one is Laura. Laura, thank you very much for being with us today, and the floor is yours. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. I should share my screen?
Yes, please, unless you have problems and we do it from our side. No, it's coming. You see? Excellent. Thank you, Laura.
1 second, the slideshow. Okay, now you should be able to see my presentation.
Yes, we are. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you so much, and very happy and honored to be here with you in this webinar. Thank you for inviting the Land Portal, and for for listening to the previous speakers. I had already heard Aurélie, but also and other colleagues talking about data access to information, the importance of it, so sharing more case studies. I also heard about data interoperability, was particularly pleased to hear that. So I think it's not very new what I'm going to say, but I'm of course very happy to stress again the importance of having more access to information and data for understanding what is happening, documenting what is happening, and become able to take more informed decisions and actions. So what is the situation? What is at stake? What are the main drivers here? So the first step really is getting a sense of what is happening and understanding what the data is telling us now. So we are really talking about a crisis. We are talking about a third of our planet, which is already degraded, and this situation is going to become worse and worse, raising to almost 90% of our global soil by 2050, which is really, really needed an urgent reaction. We are talking about overgrazing, monocultures, deforestation and mining. What does it mean? It means that very often, yes, the degradation is due to climate change, but more often is driven by unsustainable use, unsustainable management, unsustainable of governance of our natural resources, which drives social and political instability, leading to poverty, insecurity, food insecurity, conflict, and migration very soon if we don't reverse the situation. If we look at the reasons and consequences of land degradation, we see strong relationship, as I said, with management and governance of land, and increasingly lead by unsustainable governance of management of our natural resources. The data says, for instance, that in 12 emerging economy countries, 31% of the area included in timber, mining, and agriculture concessions overlap with local communal land. This is a study from RRI, and if we think that now the majority of the local communities, forest communities, indigenous communities that manage this customary land legally own a small fraction of it, you already identify. It becomes very clear where the vulnerability is lies. So the tenure situation, so the land degradation is also really disrupting agrarian and pastoral systems, especially for those communities that really depend on the very fragile relationship between soil, energy, and food. So this is the situation. The data is very clear, but still, is the data really providing a clear picture? Is the data really providing a clear instrument to reverse this situation? Well, because land is so complex, is so cross-cutting and multidimensional issues, sitting in many broad development areas, such as climate environment, but also food security and agriculture, economic development, investment, land governance and rights, is very, very complex and very difficult to get a clear understanding. So the ability to really assess the nexus between land degradation and the food and the security of tenure is very complex, because the data really is collected by different actors, different agencies. And most of the conversations really happen in silos, because every agency really follows its own need, its own mandates. And on the top of that, specifically when we refer to land tenure data, often we face a situation of incomplete, closed, inaccessible, and of data. Therefore, very difficult to aggregate, very difficult to monitor, very difficult to analyze, and not usable. And on the top of that, the lack of coordination, especially cross sector, cross-agency collaboration and dialogue makes this even more difficult. The SDG target 15.3 is already measuring land cover change, land productivity, and carbon stocks. but again, leaving out many other very important aspects. And if we look at, in particular, in becoming able to measure the relationship between land degradation and tenure, requires too big set of data. The biophysical, as Aurélie has already mentioned earlier. So whereas the measuring of biophysical data is usually done through a series of impressive, very sophisticated tools and are which are available, the real challenge really comes when we want to correlate this biophysical data of the soil with the tenure of data. So not in this case, we already know that the majority of this data is really unavailable and inaccurate, not offering not a right understanding of the situation. So apart from that, there is also a significant gap in aligning these two data types. Because most of land degradation neutrality projects really are more short-term projects compared to longer term land governance project, and also very specifically targeting specific areas, whereas land governance are more nationwide or region-wide programs. So there are really alignment difficulties. These aspects have been documented, and I would suggest you to really read the data story, data comparability and linking land degradation and tenure security that we have published together with FAO and UNCCD, that is available on the land portal. And also for broader context, I also invite you to visit the thematic page on the relationship between land degradation and tenure, again, on the land portal. Again, in such a complex context, we see information and data as critical enabler of a more equitable, environmentally sustainable governance of land that address land degradation. What is the land portal doing in such a context? Well, we've been over the last 2 decades advocating for more open, more inclusive, and more democratic and high quality information and data on land governance. And in such a context, we aim at driving progress in 3 main directions. One, supporting actions that help information providers, mainly governments, but also other data custodians, to make data more open, more accessible. Secondly, engaging stakeholders into a constructive and inclusive dialogue and conversation around data and data needs. And finally, build data alliances within and beyond the land sector. As an example, in the last 10 years, we have built an open data movement together with some organizations that are part of the open data community, like the Open Data Charter, the Open Government Partnership, the Global Data Barometer, the Data for Development. And together with these organizations, the movement is becoming the primary driver of an open data ecosystem, developing tools and resources that help measuring, documenting, assessing, and ultimately improving the state of land data. So my last slide is really presenting what is State of Land Information Program is about. Again, in a situation where there is a lack of awareness of the benefits of shared data, open data, there is poor capacity, poor technical capacity, poor data literacy, insufficient legal framework that support an inclusive data governance, and also a lack of political incentive to enable cooperative data sharing. This partnership is promoting the State of Land Information Program that includes several tools. So whereas the State of Land Information reports and the index are meant to mapping, measuring, assessing how open information is and find also entry points for action, the Open Up Guide is more useful tool to and is a useful resource to really advancing the conversation about open data with national authorities, but also major data custodians and development partners as well. It's also a very important tool for donors to understand whether and where investments should go to improve national land information systems, but also could be used to identify areas for cooperation, for instance, between private and public sector, between civil society and governments, in really improving the quality, quantity, and accessibility of land data. So I really welcome you to look at these tools and come to us because it's about cooperating, it's about joining forces, it's about come together and form alliances, because we all want a world in which government become better able to collect, to share, and to use well-governed data to really respond to climate crisis and other crises as well. So I stop here and welcome your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, very much for the presentation, which I think it's extremely relevant for today's discussion. You draw the attention on, for example, the gap in the alignment between data connected to land tenure, for example, and then land degradation neutrality, which is crucial in my view, since we're talking about linking the two concepts. But you also draw our attention on the importance of building alliances for data collection, data management, and data sharing, which is also very important. And it's at the core of one of the objectives of the International Land Coalition, that is the organization represented by Eva, who is our next speaker. Eva, please, you have the floor. Eva has also a presentation related to data and data management, and then we will move into a Q&A session. Thank you, Eva, for managing the time, because we are a little bit behind schedule. Thank you.
Yes, great. Thanks to you, Francesca, and I hope that you all see my screen. Tell me if you do not.
We do, Laura. Sorry, Eva, thank you.
Thanks, perfect. As Francesca said, my name is Eva Hirscher. I'm the Global Data and Land Monitoring Lead for the International Land Coalition. As also anticipated, today I'm going to be speaking about the need for diverse, inclusive, and multidimensional land data that can help inform the UNCCD targets, as well as their alignment with the VGGTs, and I would argue other development frameworks as well. So the International Land Coalition is a broad global coalition of members. We work with more than 300 members across 84 countries, and we represent an estimated 70 million land users. So the power of our coalition is the members and the work that they're doing on the ground. We have been a partner in the UN Decade for Restoration for the last few years, and we've taken up the co-leadership of Challenge 5.1 in the Decade of Restoration, which focuses on the links between tenure security and restoration. We're leading this challenge together with two of our regional platforms, which are in Asia and in Latin America, and you'll hear more from them if you attend these other webinars. But today I'm going to speak broadly about our ambitions on data and what we intend to do as the International Land Coalition, how we think that our work to centralize, generate, and elevate people's data can be especially crucial as we're trying to hone in on these key issues of land tenure security and how they can inform ambitions across different areas of work, including that of UNCCD. So in recent years, we've elevated our work on data to a strategic objective, meaning that we're putting a lot of focus, weight, effort into our work to align different data initiatives and also to generate inclusive land data across the network. So we realize that our network, as a very diverse set of coalitions and organizations themselves, have long been collecting data, using data, and advocating with data that speaks to questions of restoration, of degradation, and to the potential of these communities to care sustainably for the land. As our strategic objective number 2, this data, we want to use this data to hold key actors accountable. That means that we need to organize this data, we need to present it strategically and clearly, and we need to get it into the spaces where it can be most impactful. So what this means specifically for land degradation and land tenure. So we know that there are key indicators, as mentioned by Sasha, by Aurélie, and in the technical guide, we have guiding indicators that tell us important things. They're established parameters for land degradation neutrality and land tenure. So we have 15.3.1, a well-established SDG indicator, which a number of other panelists have spoken about. This is going to tell us the proportion of land that is degraded according to 3 parameters established by the indicator. We also know that we have 2 crucial land tenure indicators that have reached tier 2 status and that have an established community behind them, and they also have data. The first is 1.4.2, an SDG that looks at the proportion of the overall population with documentation and that has perceived security to their tenure rights. These are 2 different things that don't go hand in hand, as we know. We also have indicator 5A1, which is going to tell us the total population with agricultural land and the proportion of which is women. These are key land tenure indicators that can guide us. We know, however, that this is a much more complex question than understanding rates of land tenure and the proportion of land that is degraded. We could look at these indicators together. We could do an analysis of to what extent they inform one another, but we know that we need to go further. If we're going to understand complex systems of land tenure, the way that this interacts with customary land tenure, collective land tenure, women's land rights, we need other indicators, and this means that we need diverse sources of data. So we need to understand, as other colleagues have mentioned, the extent to which the legal framework is enabling land tenure for different groups in different contexts. We know that 5A2, another well-established SDG, provides an assessment of the extent to which the legal framework is providing women's land rights. This has also been raised in the technical guide as complementary, supplementary indicator that could give us a further understanding of the challenges for women in this context. We also need to understand what the bundle of rights is available in that country for indigenous peoples, for local communities. We need to understand to what extent the government has embedded principles of free, prior, and informed consent into that framework, and to what extent it's applied and applied meaningfully. We need to know whether or not decision-making involves rural land users, if it involves women, if it involves indigenous peoples and local communities. These are softer indicators, perhaps more qualitative, that don't speak to the biophysical rates of land degradation, but they inform our capacity to stop degradation and to put restoration capacity back in the hands of communities. Finally, to what extent a human rights-based approach is being being upheld in these projects and informing our means, our ways of achieving land degradation neutrality. Oh, I did not show that slide. This is what I was speaking to. Sorry, here's the slide, and now I'm jumping to the next one. So we know that beyond the land tenure indicators that we have guide us, but they are not enough to show us everything that we want to see. So official land tenure data is limited. We know that it does not capture collective lands. We know that it does not capture customary land. We know that it doesn't account for the nuances of women and of youth. We know that IPL and LCs are not well represented. So we're seeing more and more this growing recognition that diverse data sources are needed to cover these gaps, and to cover these gaps, and more than cover these gaps, to give us a nuanced understanding of land tenure in these countries. We know that there are data sources that can do this. We know that Prindex provides an important data set that can be applied. We know Landmark provides for IP and LC demarcation. We know RRI has a data set that can tell us important aspects of control of land and the ecosystems, the indigenous navigator. There are many data sets that we could employ and analyze to better understand land tenure in specific contexts. There's a potential of citizen-generated complementary data to fill our gaps and these understandings. If we limit ourselves to official land tenure data, we will not be able to plan in an inclusive way to achieve land degradation neutrality. These data sets, these data points, these indicators give us a better understanding of the links between land tenure for specific groups and their capacity to facilitate restoration. I'm going to give a quick example of Cameroon. This is data that we have generated, identified, centralized through Landex. Landex is the Global Land Governance Index. It's our primary tool for data collection and centralization at the International Land Coalition. If we look only at SDG data in Cameroon, we would have a very limited understanding of the land tenure situation there and the extent to which land and ecosystems are locally controlled. So we work on 3 levels, and Landex, we measure how inclusive the legal framework is. In this case, we want to understand if the legal framework includes commitments to land degradation neutrality and whether or not land use planning is including participation from local land users. We see that in Cameroon, an assessment of the legal framework was relatively good. There is a commitment to the LDN, and there have been targets set. We know that indigenous people and local communities, however, cannot legally own land in Cameroon. That again is an additional data point that informs our understanding of how LDN would be achieved. We know that local participation in land use planning remains limited. There's no data available on the proportion of rural administrative districts that are governed by sustainable land use plans. And we know that only 9% of Cameroon is designated for indigenous peoples and local communities. Finally, in a small sample, but a sample nonetheless among those living on community land in Cameroon showed that their perceived levels of tenure security were rather low. This again concerning and again indicates an area where more focus could be put and unpacked in order to achieve the restoration potential of these communities. I would start to close with next steps. So it's important that we consider diverse sources of data, contextualized data. We're going to hear from different partners across these series of webinars that are going to tell us what they're monitoring, what their indicators of success are, how they're achieving land degradation neutrality. As Aurélie and others mentioned, we need to improve data interoperability. We know that there are SDGs. We know that the CBD framework recently established is also pushing for a land tenure indicator. We need to work to make sure that we show that that's viable, that there are sources of data that could achieve that. We need to create openings for those. We see a greater acceptance growing for complementary, diverse data. We need to show how that will work in practice and to support these data efforts. We need to build processes for citizen-led and people's data and consider these multiple enabling factors for community-led restoration potential. I would stop there. Happy to answer questions. Thank you. Back to you, Francesca.
Dear Eva, thank you so much for the excellent presentation. I would like to thank the speakers who have been very active in the chat, already replying to some of the questions. There are many, which we are definitely unable to answer live. But I take the freedom to pick one of them, and I want to reassure the participants that we will do our best to reply to all of them in the chat. And I also would like to confirm, as many of you have asked, that we will be sharing all the presentation and the recording of today's session when the webinar is concluded. So I am gonna pick on Laura, and I would like Laura to address a question that is for you in the chat. And the question is the following. Laura, can you hear me? Yes. So Laura, the question is the following, is specifically referred to one of your slides. How does the open land data movement verify the data that is provided by public institutions, donors, and financial institutions with the local community in the respective areas in order to have inclusive data? So that's a very crucial question that would probably deserve additional 3 hours to reply, but thankful for your thoughts on that. And apologies for all the others that I am not considering. So thank you, Laura.
I also tried to type in a response while you were you were talking. Yes, indeed, this is a very good question, and thank you for asking, because it raises a very important point. We decided through the State of Land Information report to really narrow the focus of the intervention, to really map. There is so many data stakeholders and people collecting different type of data that the exercise could easily become impossible and too broad. So we decided to focus our intervention to really understand what are the public available data, so the data that the government is supposed to collect and make available as to carry out their land administration functions. So the government are supposed to be the driver of land value, land development, land tenure, land use data, be the one collecting, managing, and making available as public good data. In carrying out these functions, they have a big responsibility, and again, we believe that data is public good and should really be accessible to all citizens. Having said that, this is of course not the situation in many countries, and that's why there are a number of other organizations that are coming to the space, trying to fill in the gap, trying to collect data, and also try to open a conversation with the public authorities in legitimizing this other data. This is absolutely a critical driver for increasing accountability and responsibility of government authorities, and absolutely should absolutely continue. But again, what we are trying to do with the State of Land Information is providing a snapshot of what is the state, who is doing what, who is collecting what data, trying to map the ecosystem means understanding the flows of data, who is collecting what data, where, who is using this data, where this data goes, for what purpose, because data is not an end in itself, it should really be used to drive change, to drive decisions. So we want also to understand how the data is used and by whom. But again, with providing such a mapping, it could be an initial step to understand where there are entry points for funding, for instance, to improve this information ecosystem, where there is potential for cooperation between which is happening already in many countries now, between local communities and government, between private sector and government. The technology is evolving so fast. There is a huge data collection initiatives going on everywhere, and more opening also by government institutions to really legitimize this data. But again, an effort needs to be done in understandings, mapping, and describing the situation, the data landscape, to understand where interventions. And again, the state should also be back at the center, because in the end, data is public good and is a responsibility of our governments to really collect and manage data effectively.
Thank you, Laura, for the answer and for being so precise and so detailed. I have been monitoring the chat, and I've seen some questions already looking forward to be on how to engage on the initiative. I can only say stay with us until the end of the session. We will hear more about the call for proposal on how to be part of this initiative toward the end of today's session. Without waiting any longer, I would like to enter the second part of the webinar. As we said, this is dedicated to Africa and the Arab region. So we really need to move to the region. And to do that, I will start with, in fact, the Arab region. The first set of, the first pool of speakers, we have three women, Ombretta Tempra, land specialist at UN Habitat Global Land Network, together with Mona Keshen, I apologize if the pronunciation is not correct, who is an independent urban development planner and researcher, and Petra Samaha, urban planner and researcher, as a member of the Lebanese Center for Policy Studies. So the three speakers will share with us a reflection on how to respond to climate change challenges through improved land governance in the Arab region. And I want to take the opportunity to remind us all that interpretation is available also in Arabic. Ombretta, please, the floor is yours, and followed by Mona and Petra. I don't know exactly the order, but one after the other. Ombretta, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Francesca, good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be speaking at this webinar on land governance and climate in the Arab region, presenting the lessons and recommendations from the Arab Land Initiative. Sorry, I'm trying to move the slides. Yes, thanks. So the Arab region, we are familiar with it. It's 22 countries, very youthful population, very much urban region, and it's a peculiarity that 90% of the people live on only 4% of the land, which clearly gives us the indication of where the different land uses encroach, and the competition among, for example, urban dwellers and farmers really intensifies. Is a region very much affected by migration and displacement, with over 60%, 60 million, people on the move, and characterized by an extreme water scarcity. We know that 18 out of 22 countries have really major problem with fresh water, and the fresh water utilization is 76% compared to a 7% global average. Desertification and land degradation is a major issue. Considering 73% of land is considered to be degraded, and also a region very much affected by fragility, instability, conflict, which obviously reverse and on one side reverse the gain, divert the attention from climate change and addressing land governance or land degradation, but also reduce the space for the institution to engage really on this broader reform that would really be needed. Land administration is overall extremely opaque, with land recordation system mostly paper-based, except in a handful of countries. And a land sector really over-occupied by the state, not only physically, because state is the biggest landowner, but also really in terms of the capacity of other stakeholders, civil society and non-state actors to engage in discussion related to land governance, land tenure security, land degradation, etc. So in terms of our analysis that we have done in the Arab region with local partners, we have seen that if we look at, for example, climate change and poor land governance, in red there in the graphic, the manifestations are different. The manifestation of climate change, range from forest fires, droughts, land degradation, sea level rise, and increased soil salinity, for example, etc. And those of poor land governance, are unregulated urban sprawl into agricultural area, an increase of industrial agriculture and monoculture, overgrazing, land tenure insecurity, loss of communal land, or deforestation, obviously, etc. But if we look at the yellow outer rings, which is representing the impact on people and planet, the two, climate change and poor land governance, have actually similar impact. And we see, competition over land, rural to urban migration, loss of biodiversity, food insecurity, livelihood decline, etc. So from these considerations, we have derived a set of recommendations, which are actually described a bit more in detail in this publication, Land Governance, Natural Resources and Climate Change in the Arab region, of which I also put the link in the chat. That describe, so how should we go about this as international community, as local communities. The first is really the need of the land governance stakeholders and the environmental scientists to come together to have holistic approaches. We basically need to protect at the same time, we need to have intervention that at the same time protect ecosystem, protect human security, and enable social protection policies. Without these three components, as also came out from previous speakers, we are not going to be able to address the challenges in the region. Clearly setting the targets is important, securing land tenure rights of the different stakeholders, urban dwellers, smallholder farmer, pastoralists, communities, because they all share a very limited inhabitable or usable space in the region. Refocus on sustainable land use, sustained but fit for purpose land administration without recording, and being able to registering and managing the land is very difficult to make a change where we want to make it. And also, lastly, but not least, empower local actors to enable local action with capacity, knowledge, and finance. And that's exactly the approach of the Arab Land Initiative, which has at the heart empower a developed capacity of land governance champions to a range of actions, looking at capacity, collaboration, knowledge, and country level action. And the initiative really, over 90% of the initiative budget is spent in the region to partners from the region to enable exactly their engagement in these topics. And lastly, we believe that our change model demonstrated to work in empowering land governance champions so that they are better able to influence power dynamic, facilitate national discussions, support coalition development, and engage with policymakers and with international partners, basically taking all what we've been discussed so far and trickling down really at the country level, at the national level, to achieve, the change that we want to see, that you see listed there on the right on my slide, and particularly on climate action, land use management, ecosystem restoration, and biodiversity conservation. These are obviously very long-term processes that will require those who lead are able to actually speak the language of the stakeholders and interpret, the global frameworks in a language, in a also way of understanding it that is easily to capture and understand from partners from the region. With that, I would like to hand over actually the floor to Petra, who will present a case study on behalf actually I have only two speakers for this session. Mona and Petra were part of the same team. So over to Petra to actually speak about the Lebanon case study. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambrita. I'll be presenting on the behalf of Mona and myself. And by the way, neither of us is still with LCPS, but we were during the elaboration of the report that Ambrita briefly showed. And I will elaborate now on one of the case studies that was mentioned briefly in the report, but is getting an increasing attention recently, whether for climate change or migration challenges. Yeah, thanks. So Zahle is a city in the inner Bekaa agricultural plains of Lebanon. And its topography is peculiar as it extends over two hills, as you can see in the pictures, with various slopes, the valley in between, rich in water, and vast agricultural plains. It has several water sources. It has two rivers that suffer from pollution and droughts. And here I deliberately picked pictures from various seasons, so you can see the richness of the area. The population of this city is estimated at 100 or 120,000 Lebanese, in addition to another 20,000 Syrian refugees residing in the informal tented settlements in the plains of the city. And it's also estimated that a larger number of refugees reside within the urban areas as well. Next slide, please. The agricultural plains in the Bekaa Valley in general and in the city are historically flood zones. They used to be swamps in winter, which is why they are a fertile agricultural land today. Now they only flood occasionally in winter seasons, so farmers have started to rely on boreholes for irrigation in the past decades, and they have to dig deeper now, and the water is not of the same purity as it was in the past. And all the informal tented settlements overlap with the flood risk areas, but also on soil erosion risk areas. Next slide, please. And of the 400 settlements that are in the Zahle city, about 65% of them at least have endured flooding in the past winter, but also no less than 17% of them dump their wastewater outside the camp into the soil directly, which is very absorbent, or into water canals. Now, is this a result of a lack of planning? It's not necessarily, or not exactly, because the lands in the area are decreed as agricultural lands of national importance by the National Physical Master Plan of the Lebanese territory, dating from 2005. And these are agricultural lands that are the least fragmented in terms of ownership, but they are all private lands or Miri land with private usufruct rights. It's a type of ownership that is dealt with as a private today in Lebanon. Next slide, please. So even with local master plans, and the latest for Zahle was done recently in 2019-2020, it highlighted the ecological continuities beyond administrative borders in the city. Even with these plans, and even when the lands are zoned as agricultural, the enforcement of these land uses onto private property remains a challenge. And the contracts between the Syrian settlements Shawish and the Zahle landlords remain unprohibited, and there's no alternative for their housing anyway. So in addition, and more specifically, the decisions or lack thereof at the national level on how to deal with the Syrian refugee crisis in Lebanon since 2012 has strengthened this laissez-faire situation in which the decisions are awaited for to come from the outside, from other regional powers. And in this case, as urban planners, we feel that territorial planning, despite the availability of several plans, becomes short of a tool to shape and protect the territory and the livelihoods of people living on it, whether against climate change or migration crises, let alone if they overlap. So long that there is no strong state governing properly its land and its people, be them residents or refugees. This was one complex case study in Lebanon. I hope it answers some of the questions that were raised today, and happy to discuss more in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Petra. And just as a final word, I think this case kind of illustrates a little bit how, the theme become complex and how the different aspects of land governance and climate consideration, climate change interact when we come down to the local level, and why it's important that really this engagement is led by the local communities and the local experts, the national experts that really are able to connect all the dots and link the work with the broader national processes that are sometimes, focused on land and climate, but sometimes they are framed in different ways. And with that, I hand over back to you, Francesca. Thank you.
Thank you, Ombretta. Thank you, Petra. And thank you to Mona, even though she was not present today, but it's important to recognize her contribution as well. And thank you also for sharing with us a concrete example from the region where we have specific challenges that makes the addressing land degradation in particularly severe and important, I would say. Let's move to the next speaker before we dedicate more time. I promise this time for Q&A, but I would like to conclude the round of presentation on the region. And so we are moving to Sub-Saharan Africa. The next speaker is Sheikh Abdelkader Baba, representing TMG Research. His presentation will also, let's say, cover points that were supposed to be covered by a colleague from Lande, Mr. Rakoto, who for connection problem was not able to join us today. And so Kader will share a presentation on the conundrum of forest-dependent communities in land degradation neutrality and biodiversity conservation policies. Insights from Madagascar and Benin. So, Kader, you have the floor. I hope you could hear me. I know you are connected. I can see you now. Kader, please, you have the floor. And I would like to invite participants to keep sending questions to the speakers, including Ombretta and Petra, through the chat. Thank you. Kader, please.
Yeah, thanks, Francesca. Yeah, I apologize for my colleague who is not able to attend the session. I will present some insight of our research in Madagascar and walk you through the conundrum of smallholder farmers in land degradation neutrality and biodiversity conservation policies. So here is the outline of my presentation. So I will go right away. Madagascar is the fourth largest island on Earth and home to unique wildlife and biodiversity research. So about 92% of mammals, 95% of reptile, 89% of its plants life exists nowhere else on Earth. These are the data from WWF. Of course, this has some implication and trigger a lot of conservation policies, including like the ambitious land restoration targets under Madagascar target setting program. They are aiming at, for example, 400,000 hectares of land restoration per year. Under the new strategic plan, it's even 4 million on the horizon 2030. To protect this unique biodiversity, today there is around 125 protected areas. And as I mentioned, more and more strong policies to protect both the existing forests and even increase forest areas. The critical question is how and at what cost, with or without the adjacent communities, and keeping in mind that more than half of the rural population in Madagascar rely heavily on forests for food, fuel, and building material. So high dependency on land and forest resources. So this critical question triggers pilot research that TMG and its partners are implemented in Madagascar, in Benin, in Kenya, and in Malawi to understand conservation management challenge, power dynamics, land governance issues. The end goal being to support the implementation of land degradation neutrality in those countries, and also collect enough evidence to document the challenge and opportunities to implement UNCCD decision 26 COP14 on land tenure. So our approach is digital participatory mapping coupled with multi-stakeholder reflection processes on land tenure. And this is fundamental because despite the overwhelming calls to integrate land tenure and land degradation neutrality, there is still a disconnect between policy calls at the international level and decision makers at the national level. I can elaborate more and more, but since we have limited time, I will just go ahead. On the drivers of land degradation, I think if you can see my pictures, you may sense what are the drivers, but we have like drivers that seems evident and visible. Like here, we can see forest fires, which is a critical issue in Madagascar. You also see farming practice, sometimes unsustainable, which are a critical issue. You cannot see here, but there is also like grazing. So you also have biophysical that I will not undermine here, including like the topography. You also have like climate, because the region is prone to cyclones. So on this graph, you will see here what I call like what we can see like the apparent drivers, but the underlying drivers that often are not seen directly include, for example, inappropriate or inadequate conservation policies, which exacerbate frustration and conflict and reinforce the perception of tenure and security, together with a lot of reticence to invest in sustainable land management, which also again will trigger new policies like hardline policies, and again more and more frustrations. So I will lead you through this issue we found in Madagascar through a story, the story of Liansu, a woman living in Marasaku. Marasaku is a commune like located here inside a protected area. This protected area is the Ankara Fonseca National Park. Inside you have some communities who are living under specific management conditions and rules. So I will present, it's a fictive story of a lady who is living there, but based on the data that collect on the ground. So Liansu is a 55-year-old widow with 5 children. She derives her household income from her rice fields of about 0.48 hectare, has limited alternative for income diversification, and has no opportunity to move to another place outside the forest area due to the high demand for land. Some policies, we could call it inadequate or adequate depending on which area we stand by. That's why I put the into bracket, because if we are from a conservation line and only looking at conservation, it may seem inadequate. But if you are looking at communities' tenure rights, trying to find ways to reconcile conservation policies and livelihood needs, probably you find it somehow inadequate, and that may need more reflection. So one policy is, for example, no formal document to prove use right or ownership through, although, for example, people have been living around this area for more than 20 years, even some people are born there. Another policy is, for example, although living in a cyclone-prone area, the communities living inside the park are only allowed houses with precarious material. The reason behind being that the authorities of the park need to protect the park, and, for example, are very keen to protect the land of the park and the forest resources. So behind those policies, you have conservation goals, but you also have a crucial concern for forest land, which is fair enough for conservation policies. But what such kind of policies triggers is, for example, what you can see here, a lot of frustration and conflict, whereby, for example, the lady use her savings to build a new house, and because it's with precarious material, a cyclone destroy it. That means she needs also to save again, to talk with forest authorities to have new permission, to spend money to have again like raw materials from the forest and to build again. In the context where she has limited resources, it's quite challenging. But despite all the challenges she is facing, her 20 years old, each year is solicited to fight forest fires, despite a lot of 100 millions going into forest conservation. These are the kind of discourse that are coming again and again from communities and from Liansu. The perception of tenure and security. Clearly here you see like communities are very much worried, especially those who are living inside the controlled occupancy zone of the park. Over 70% are stated to be worried, to very worried. And on the reason why they are worried, you can also see like over 77% are worried about forced eviction by the forest authorities or the government. Reticences to invest in land restoration, that is clearly coming from all the frustration and conflicts. You could also sense the reluctancy. Why should Liansu invest on a land where her use rights are not formally recognized and from which she can be evicted anytime? How she or anyone else from her community could realistically engage in forest conservation if the collaboration basis is met with conflict and distrust? So here you could see, for example, on the use of sustainable land management practice for communities living inside the controlled occupancy zone, over 72% respond that they are not using sustainable land management practice, but on the other communal lands, which are not inside the forest, the share is quite different. And you could also see here on this graph, the likelihood to invest on sustainable land management if tenure concern was addressed. And here you could see inside the park a very huge likelihood to invest on sustainable land management, highlighting again the crucial importance of addressing tenure concern for sustainable land management and land degradation neutrality. So our lessons learned and recommendations here are: forest conservation goals cannot be delinked with the legitimate right of adjacent communities to forest land and resources. Effective conservation measures are those that recognize and protect legitimate tenure rights as basic safeguard in promoting land restoration. Strong governance frameworks that foster land right agenda, mainstream gender and secure access right of dependent communities is key to minimize conflict, ensure success in restoration programs. Securing women's land rights through targeted policies and reform is vital to promoting social justice, poverty alleviation, and sustainable land management. It's also important that as we are implementing the Rio Conventions, that we reduce functional gaps at the national level to advance the recognition and protection of legitimate tenure rights. This last point is really important because it seems that the three conventions are working in silos, and on the ground, it's even more disrupted. And coming from different perspectives, we also tend to understand the question of tenure right from different perspectives. It seems like when you talk about tenure right, people from biodiversity, conservation, or climate, whose focus is on the forest, may say what we understand from this call is we need to secure the forest land. But from other perspective, individuals will not invest on land restoration if they don't have a sense of land security. And yet you have an important number of communities living adjacent to the forest, which concerns are often not addressed or is barely addressed. And I will close my presentation by this question that Liantu is asking herself, and beyond Liansu, is all the communities facing the conflict between biodiversity protection and their livelihoods. Is lemurs and other aquatic species life and survival worth than mine and my family? Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Kader. Thank you also for providing us with a concrete example on how important and relevant is the security of the land and the forest in order to invest in any type of activity in relation to could be land degradation, could be climate change, could be land restoration. But the data that you show us are indisputable, no? The difference between those who have clear security and those who have not. And so your presentation is extremely well appreciated and insightful. Before moving to the last part of this session, I can see there are some questions in the chat. One of which I would like to address to Petra is very short. Petra, if you can hear me, and I see you are still there. And the question is the following: agricultural production in the Arab countries very often faces foreign competition with powerful commercial lobbies, marginalizing agriculture as a productive sector. in such a situation, land becomes more interesting economically for real estate industry. It is also the case for the city of Zale in the Bekaa Valley that you just described. I see you nodding, so I'm sure you have an answer to that. Thank you, Petra, also for being concise in your reply. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, the value of land, unfortunately, today is always connected to how much it can be built. And this, in the absence of a decent fiscal framework in Lebanon, and absence of policies regarding how to promote agriculture as a productive economic sector that can hold the country, yes, the land is, especially the private lands today, are seen as lands waiting to be built. And their value is connected to how tall the building will be. Yes, that's very concise, I think.
It was concise, but to the point. Thank you, Petra. I would like to make another try to conclude the session dedicated to Africa and the Arab region by showing you the video that we were not able to project at the beginning. Yes, the video is coming, so please enjoy with us the video from Senegal, please. Thank you so much. This time worked perfectly, and I'm sure you enjoyed the video. I feel we didn't have enough space for the first set of speakers for Q&A. So before we move to the last session, I would like to check whether Evelyn is available to take another question. Evelyn, are you still with us? There were a number of questions addressed to Landesa. Maybe not. We'll make sure. Oh, yes, yes, she is. Evelyn, can I address you a question before we move to the last part of the session?
Yes, you can.
Thank you. So, Evelyn, there were a number of questions addressed to you, but one it's very specific, and the question is the following: what are some of the major problems Landesa has faced in awareness raising campaign, and what are the steps that you have taken to adapt? There is also a question in relation to tools that you have been using. Maybe you can combine both. If you could help us in answering this question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Francisca, for the question. And thanks to colleagues whom have attempted to respond to your question online, but maybe not significantly or exhaustively. So yes, so Landesa has been working with other partners towards the campaign on securing women land rights, the Stand for Her Land campaign. And as I've indicated in the presentation, we've made an effort also to be able to integrate aspects of land degradation, looking at aspects of rights and tenure security and how this interfaces with LDN. But also in addition to that, generally, this also touches on other, collaborative aspects and campaigns that are more national than are at the global level. For example, on securing women land rights, on integrating gender specific issues and climate change in land use planning, and other related, or land formalization process, particularly for local communities or customary land rights. So in terms of challenges, one is ensuring that we have, really a good entry point. As Landesa, our approach mainly is to work with government institutions. And I know from a civil society point of view, the approach has mainly, from the work that I've done before, probably not even within Landesa, but the approach has often been challenging the government, for example, on what they have not been able to do better. But Landesa takes the approach, or we take the approach of analyzing the context, understanding the context, and then be able to tell the government, hey, or the relevant departments, we need to do ABCD. Here are our results of what we have been able to evaluate, and develop partnership with the government, bringing on board other local partners. And as I said, we also work with the local partners, building on that partners' capacity, be it our fellow civil society members, but also working with the institutions of government to be able to cause change. I said examining the entry point is really important to ensure that, one, we are able to speak, we are able to interact with the instruments of government or institutions of governments that are mandated to carry or to be able to deliver on this responsibility. As civil society organization, there's much we can be able to do, but we need, for example, policy to be addressed. We should be able to get the policy addressed so that we are able not just to integrate, gender responsiveness, climate change, or reducing degradation in some of the practices and work we do with the communities, but how do we make it more of a practice that is sustainable by ensuring that we are able to, have this integrated in the policy instruments. As I said in the chat, our work in Tanzania and Liberia around land use planning and how we've worked with governments and the civil society in these two countries already demonstrate the potential opportunities that is already there. So we have to identify who to work with. We have to be deliberate on why we need to work with them and be fully aware of the approach. It's not just about pinpointing on where the gaps are, but ensuring within all that arrangement, the community remains at the center. So for a campaign like the Stand for Her Land campaign, access to resources to be able to accompany and make sure that we also are not coming in as an international organization with the international expertise to fix African, for example, problems, but the African people themselves are able to lead efforts that are able to address these issues. And by so doing, then this requires resources to be able to facilitate resource persons from these communities, experts from these communities who are able to lead these processes, be it from the national government, be it from the civil society, be it also from the private sector. Our Tanzania work with the private sector, for example, we are working with them in Tanzania, and we have a private sector partner who has actually volunteered to give back the land that has been idle back to the community. This is an example that has never been heard of. And we are hoping that in working together with them, but also with the community, driving the agenda and putting all these issues on the table, we are able to move things forward. Landesa has worked on a number of tools. There's a tool about private sector engagement, where we are looking at how does a community, for example, where there's a private sector interested in working with them, will not just come to the table as a recipient of what the government and the private sector want to do, but they are able to work on a tripartite, collaborative, engaging process that then brings all these parties together as partners, as collaborators, and be able to define the way forward. Other tools, for example, on the JC approach on how do we mainstream gender-related aspects, social inclusion, human rights in all this work that we are talking about. So some of those challenges in terms of how do we ensure that we keep abreast with the local, ensuring that the local context is well understood, get the local expertise and strengthen those in terms of work with the civil society and government, getting the resources required are some of the challenges that we face when doing campaigns, but also speaking probably directly to the context of this discussion. All these things are possible where there's really a goodwill, there's partnership, and that's strategic partnership with institutions and local capacity. And if not there, we are able to work towards strengthening that. So that's how I will respond to that question. And thanks for asking.
Thank you, Evelyn, and thank you for staying with us until the end and for taking the time to answer. There are a number of the questions that are going to be addressed by the next speaker, who is Sasha Alexander. A number of questions that are all about how do we get engaged? How can we take action? How can we work together to address some of the challenges that we have been discussing today? So the answer is, or partial answer, is with Sasha. So Sasha, the floor is yours.
Thank you again, Francesca. So yes, thank you, colleagues, for staying with us. And I'd like to give you a brief overview of how we are going to roll out the application process for requesting national consultations on land tenure as mandated by the COP decision. So the COP decision encourages parties, first of all, to host inclusive and participatory national level dialogues. So that is a very nice invitation, which the parties have asked of themselves. So we're very much looking forward to those countries that have made progress on that particular decision. Second, they also encourage themselves to explore ways to integrate land tenure information, data governance into the capacity building efforts to achieve LDN and the SDGs and the Paris Agreement and so forth. So that's all a very good foundation for what the parties, the countries, are requesting of themselves. Now, the decision goes on to invite the UNCCD Secretariat in conjunction with FAO and all relevant partners to do a couple of things that I've highlighted here. One is to provide support upon request to implement a land tenure strategy and action plan. And another request was to develop specific guidance, meaning to take the technical guide and contextualize it for a national or regional circumstance. And that would be done through national consultations in selected countries across regions. So we're developing an application form, and I'll go through some of the logistics of this at the end. But within that, we think that there are some very fundamental criteria for considering an application for this type of consultation. One is that there must be a lead or convening a ministry or organization that has the mandate, that will be responsible for providing the venue or hosting the consultation if it's virtual. And then third is that this convening agency would collaborate with the support team to help structure the content and ensure that there are modalities for inclusive and diverse stakeholder engagement. Then there would be a number of supporting ministries that we would expect in this application. And these ministries and organizations would ensure that diverse sectors and stakeholder groups are mobilized and represented in the consultation. And then secondly, that this organization or ministry would have the capacity to contribute with experience and expertise in the areas that the country would like to focus on. Now, part of the application would be an indication of what are the primary reasons for requesting support. So here we have a checkbox section. There will be text boxes underneath each of these different reasons, so that the applicant can elaborate a little bit more. In addition, there will be an expectation that for various official letters, official documentation, that attachments will be required, so that we get an application package that is complete and that presents the whole picture. For example, one reason may be to integrate the principles and practices of the VGGT into national land restoration initiatives. There may be an Africa 100 or a MENA region land restoration initiative that is large scale, that is subnational, or is large scale and involves more than one country. So we're open to these existing initiatives to see how we can strengthen land tenure in those programs and initiatives, which tend to have a long life, 5 to 10 to 20 years in some cases for various land restoration initiatives. We'll also request the documentation on current and proposed initiatives as per the Rio Conventions, as well as other global and regional processes where countries have made significant restoration commitments, and now they're looking to mainstream tenure into the implementation of those commitments. We'd also like to get a good understanding of what the country expects out of these consultations. Is it just to raise awareness and increase outreach to civil society? One of the ways of doing that is to establish a multi-stakeholder mechanism. So that might be one expected output of the consultation. Another may be sort of an assessment and strategic recommendations on policy, legal, and institutional frameworks. Then this could be with further detail with regard to land administration needs, GIS capabilities, dispute conflict resolution, and so forth. So we'd like to hear in detail what the expected outputs would be. Then there may be other broader societal normative issues, such as what are some of the ways and means to address youth and gender disparities when it comes to control and access to land resources. And then finally, I mean, there will always be a section where the applicant can put in other and then explain what the other outputs expected might be. Now, let me talk a little bit about the logistics of the application process. We are expecting to open up or to issue a notification starting next week, so the week of the 22nd of May. And that will be through our notification process that goes to UNCCD stakeholders, and then it will be made available on the webpage that is dedicated to this call for requests for support. The deadline for submissions will be the 14th of July, so allowing for approximately 6 weeks for country stakeholders to consult with each other and to develop a multi-stakeholder request that has sufficient documentation to make a complete package. The notifications to countries selected is expected in September of this year, and then we will then begin with the first, second, and third consultations to see if we can structure them, prepare for them, and then actually hold them starting in late 2023, and then we have 2024. Keep in mind that our COP, our Conference of the Parties, is now scheduled for the first half of December in 2024. We will need to prepare several reports on the consultations, so we would expect to be able to conduct, if there is demand and if there is capacity, conduct these national consultations up through the third quarter of 2024. Now, as I said, we will have a fillable PDF form, which you can download from the webpage, which will be listed in the notification. And so applications, successful applications, must include a duly completed form, as well as duly signed official letters from the ministries and organizations that are indicated in the application form. And then finally, we will request that supporting documentation be uploaded or be attached to the email that will submit the form, the letters, and the documentation together. And again, the form and the notification will be very specific about how the submission works and how what email addresses that you will submit them to. Applications must include the UNCCD national focal point for that country, and then that would be further, let's say, backed up by the corresponding ministry that the national focal point sits in, or if it's the case of an organization or a specialized agency of the government, that letter will come from that particular entity. And the national focal point can be, and ministry can be either in a convening role or in a supporting role. And so we leave it up to the country and the group of stakeholders to determine what is best for this application. And then finally, we would request all interested stakeholders to begin consultations with the UNCCD, CBD, climate change, national focal points, Ramsar, UNFF, United Nations Forum on Forests, as well as the Land Administration ministries or agencies in country, FAO national offices, CSOs that are active in this field, and to begin to communicate and see how you would like to structure this application package. So with that, I will close, and I will be available right now to take any specific questions you might have as regards to this request for support. I thank you again. I can quickly go to the chat here. The applications themselves will not be supported in any way. If you have problems contacting the UNCCD National Focal Point, please email us, contact us. We will do our best to help facilitate communications. Same with the FAO national offices. The other sister conventions, the other CBD and climate change, we can also try and help you with that. Again, we will try and facilitate effective communication, but there is no financial support for submitting the application. The application will be evaluated by UNCCD Secretariat, FAO, as well as the 8 to 10 global and regional partners that are part of the joint initiative. We can try and get you the Côte d'Ivoire focal point. Côte d'Ivoire was the president of the last Conference of the Parties. So there should be a very high level of awareness there. So I'm not sure if my chat is live. If Francesca, if you see any other questions that are coming through on some other.
Yes, Sasha. In fact, I am not. Maybe we can. It is a rather articulated process, so I guess that participants are still trying to understand how to better interact. Please feel free to add questions. We still have 20 minutes before we go to closure. Maybe one thing that I would like to suggest. I'm trying to spot if you allow me, Sasha, while participants could ask more questions about this application process, I would like to maybe address one question to the previous speaker, to Kader. Kader, are you still? Yes.
I'm here.
Yes, since you didn't have time to reply. So Sasha, we keep monitoring the chat with regard to this specific point of application. Kader, there is a question to you. First of all, great presentation from Madagascar and great recommendation to integrate forest conservation plans with communities around the periphery. Are there illustrations where this has been successful? Often conflict occurs between conservation intentions and community livelihood. Do you want to comment on this particular question?
Yeah, thanks, Francesca. Yes, there are a lot of examples where conservation have been successfully reconciled with livelihood needs. I don't know if I should mention an example here, but if the guy who asked the question could leave an email, I can share a lot of success stories, including in Africa, in South America, or even in Asia. I can go through and share select case study. Definitely, it's worth addressing those conflicts, because hardline conservation measures have limited impact. And I think over the last years, we also sense and experiment the limits of those hardline conservation. And yeah, I think it's time to move around and to recognize that adjacent communities cannot be only labors to protect biodiversity, to protect conservation. They need to be part of the solution we are promoting.
Thank you, Kader. And just to, okay, the person who developed the question just put his contact in the chat. But let me also remind once again that we will be sharing all the presentations, and contact of the panelists will be also included in the presentation. Sasha, please.
Yeah, thank you. So let me just clarify that we don't have a fixed number of countries that we will select. We have to have geographical balance, because that is in the COP decision. The number of countries will depend on the quality of the submissions and the actors. Having the key actors with the mandates are very important. CSOs are all welcome. Any established organization that is working in a multi-stakeholder atmosphere is welcome to help contribute to the application. And finally, I would just like to say that the word consultation is very elastic, and we don't know yet what form. I mean, you know, the typical, you would see, let's say, from the Food Systems Summit, you saw national dialogues happening. And so you saw 3 days or 5 days in Capital where people came from the international community and brought everybody in country to the Capital, and they had this robust consultation. That's one form. There may be other ways that we can assist, you know, in a more streamlined fashion. You know, there may be a data issue or a legal framework issues, assessment issues. So we will build on those and then to structure just to how these consultations will look. So I hope that has answered all of the questions that I see here.
Most of the questions are with regard to focal points. I think we can respond individually to those questions. Yeah. It's also very important what you just said, Sasha, that it's the process itself, it's flexible to the extent that will be designed according to the country context, to the needs, to the proponents. And so, as you have indicated in your presentation, the ultimate outcome of the process could be very different depending on the country.
Right. And let me just build on the last question there that I see, is that you know, this could be also integrated within another process. So for example, we have now the Target Setting Program 2.0. Many of the UNCCD stakeholders might know about this. It was just launched last week, and they're looking to see how to design these transformative projects and programs, which I discussed in my first presentation, and they're looking at about 15 countries for that process. So land tenure could be, if the country so desires, could be integrated within that. And then there are other ongoing process, the Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, for example, capacity building around the global biodiversity framework, so forth and so on. So we're very much open to that type of synergy that would really, and then the idea is that this would be sustained. We know that securing a continuum of legitimate land rights, land tenure issues will take time. So we're looking to also invite donors and other private sector actors to see how we can initiate a sustained effort over time to ultimately reach our goal of secure tenure for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha. I think we are coming to an end of the session. The organizers will have the chance to go through the questions and possibly answer individually where it's possible, where there are very specific questions or requests for additional information. We trust that many or most of the questions will also be addressed through the presentation that we will share. A reminder that tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, in case you have the opportunity to inform your colleagues, a similar seminar, a webinar will be held for Latin America and the Caribbean, and then Europe, Asia, and the Pacific. Let me just spend 2 minutes to thank the panelists for the incredible and very dense and in-depth presentation that we have received today. I want to notice that we went through a 3-hour session with no break, and we still have 255 participants online. So this is encouraging for us and definitely for the organizers. So I would like to thank Evelyn from Landesa. I would like to thank Laura from the Land Portal, Eva from the International Land Coalition, Ombretta from UN Habitat, and Petra for the presentation. And finally, to conclude, Kader from TNG Research. Before closing, I would invite my colleagues Aurélie and Sasha to maybe spend 30 seconds to thank the participants again for this incredible and amazing participation. Aurélie, please.
Thank you, Francesca. Thank you for your work. Thank you to all the participants for your participation, for all the questions. I have just checked. 140 have been answered. A few are remaining. We will be working on it. Thank you. Thank you also to all those who were behind the scene and who have made this webinar possible. And we hope to keep on working. Thank you.
Sasha?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say thank you, Francesca, for moderating this this session, and I hope that all the participants or those that are interested will keep in touch with us. You will get all our email addresses, so please do not hesitate to reach out to us, and look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha. So my turn again. Thank you very much to all the presenters. Thank you to the participants. Thank you for the question. And also thank you for being active and sometimes even provocative in your question. We need that. We need to be challenged in our own work. As I said, I am a land tenure specialist officer in FAO, and I feel I have learned a lot today from the speakers, from the panelists, and from my colleagues. So once again, thank you very much for being with us, and looking forward for the new opportunity, probably, hopefully, through the call for application that we have basically just launched today. Thank you, and see you soon, I hope. Thank you.
Thank you too, as a facilitator. Thanks, colleagues. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Have a good
Thank
day.
you, Ombretta. Thanks
Bye.
to you.